Toronto software engineer Michael Singh thought he had found his perfect bride through an Indian matrimonial website. But when he discovered that 24-year-old Priya Sharma was already legally married to another man in Punjab, his $75,000 dream wedding became a deadly nightmare that would destroy 3 lives forever. If you're drawn to true crime stories that reveal how love can be weaponized and trust can turn deadly, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this case will expose the dark reality behind international marriage fraud. But let's go back to where it all began. Michael Singh had always been methodical about love, just like everything else in his 32-year life. The senior software developer at a prestigious Toronto tech firm approached relationships with the same analytical precision he brought to debugging code, carefully researched, thoroughly planned, with contingencies mapped out for every possible scenario. After 3 failed relationships with Canadian women who seemed more interested in his 6-figure salary than building a future together, Michael's mother Harjit had gently suggested he consider the matrimonial website where her friend's son had found happiness. Sitting in his downtown Toronto condo on a frigid February evening, Michael created his profile on shdconnect.com, uploading carefully selected photos that showed him at his best, professional headshots from the company directory, casual shots from his recent trip to Vancouver, and one picture with his parents that demonstrated his respect for family values. His profile read like a resume: McGill University computer science graduate, permanent resident of Canada, non-smoker, non-drinker, seeking traditional Indian bride for marriage and family. The responses came flooding in within hours. Dozens of profiles from women across India, each accompanied by carefully crafted descriptions of education, family background, and marital aspirations. But it was Priya Sharma's profile that stopped Michael's scrolling fingers dead in their tracks. Her photograph showed a stunning young woman with expressive dark eyes and a shy smile, her long black hair framed by a simple dupatta that suggested modesty without hiding her natural beauty. The accompanying text described a 24-year-old literature graduate from Amritsar who worked as an English teacher at a local private school. Their first conversation happened through the website's messaging system, with Priya's responses arriving in perfectly crafted English that revealed both intelligence and cultural awareness. She asked thoughtful questions about life in Canada, shared stories about her students, and expressed genuine curiosity about Michael's work in the tech industry. Unlike other potential matches who immediately steered conversations toward visa requirements and immigration timelines, Priya seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him as a person. The transition to WhatsApp happened naturally after 2 weeks of daily messages. Their text conversations evolved into voice calls that stretched late into the night, with Michael staying up until 3 a.m. to accommodate the 12-hour time difference. Priya's voice was melodious and warm, her laughter infectious, as she shared amusing stories about her students' attempts to understand Canadian culture through Bollywood movies. She spoke passionately about literature, quoting Rabindranath Tagore and discussing the symbolism in Margaret Atwood's novels with a kind of intellectual depth that Michael had never encountered in his previous relationships. Video calls began in March, with Priya appearing against the backdrop of what she described as her family's modest home in Amritsar. Michael caught glimpses of simple furniture, framed photographs of Sikh gurus on the walls, and occasionally her elderly mother moving quietly in the background. Priya dressed conservatively in salwar kameez during their calls, her hair neatly braided, presenting herself as the ideal blend of modern education and traditional values that Michael's family would approve of. The courtship intensified through spring and summer, with Michael finding himself completely captivated by this woman who seemed too perfect to be real. Priya shared her dreams of teaching literature at a Canadian university, of raising bilingual children who would understand both cultures, of building a life that honored tradition while embracing modern opportunities. She sent him photographs of her daily life, marking papers at her teaching desk, visiting the Golden Temple for prayers, cooking traditional Punjabi dishes that made Michael's mouth water with homesickness for his mother's kitchen. When Michael suggested he visit India to meet her family and formalize their engagement, Priya's response was initially hesitant. She explained that her father was conservative and traditional, preferring to handle marriage negotiations through proper channels with family involvement. Instead, she suggested that Michael's parents contact her family directly to begin formal discussions, following the traditional process that would show respect for both families' dignity. The formal introductions between the Singh and Sharma families took place through a series of carefully choreographed video calls that autumn, with Michael's parents Harjit and Rajinder speaking directly to Priya's father Kulwinder and her mother Jasbir. The conversations flowed in a mixture of Punjabi and English, covering everything from family histories to financial expectations, educational backgrounds to cultural values. Michael watched from the edge of the frame as his future was negotiated with the same precision his father brought to his accounting practice. Priya's family presented themselves as modest but respectable. Kulwinder worked as a government clerk in the irrigation department, while Jasbir managed the household and helped with their small farming plot outside Amritsar. They spoke proudly of their daughter's teaching career and emphasized their desire to see her settled with a good family in Canada, where she could build a meaningful life. The financial discussions were handled delicately, with both families agreeing that Michael would cover wedding expenses and visa processing costs, while the Sharmas would provide traditional jewelry and household items as part of Priya's dowry. As winter approached, the planning intensified, with Michael finding himself swept up in wedding preparations that spanned 2 continents. Priya sent him photographs of sari shopping expeditions with her mother, gold jewelry selections that sparkled under jewelers' lights, and venue options in Amritsar that ranged from modest gurdwaras to luxury hotel ballrooms. Each decision required Michael's input and, increasingly, his financial contribution. The venue deposit alone was $15,000, followed by catering costs, photographer fees, and elaborate floral arrangements that would create the perfect backdrop for their union. Michael threw himself into the wedding planning with the enthusiasm of someone who had finally found his missing piece. He arranged time off work for a month-long trip to India, booked flights, and began the complex process of bringing Priya to Canada as his spouse. The immigration paperwork was daunting. Forms that required detailed personal histories, financial statements proving his ability to support a dependent, and character references from colleagues and community leaders. Each document had to be notarized, translated, and submitted in triplicate to various government agencies. But it was the smaller moments that convinced Michael he had made the right choice. Late-night video calls where Priya would show him the henna design she was considering for the wedding, her shy excitement as she tried on different jewelry combinations, the way her eyes lit up when discussing their future home in Toronto. She had already begun learning about Canadian culture, watching YouTube videos about winter driving, and researching continuing education programs that would allow her to teach in Ontario schools. The first troubling sign came in December when Michael attempted to surprise Priya by having flowers delivered to her school for her birthday. The florist in Amritsar called him back confused, explaining that no one at the address Priya had provided had ever heard of an English teacher named Priya Sharma. When Michael confronted her about the mix-up during their evening call, Priya's explanation was smooth and immediate. She had recently transferred to a different school and had forgotten to update him with the new address. More inconsistencies began to surface as Michael's excitement grew. Friends of his parents who had relatives in Amritsar mentioned they had tried to contact the Sharma family through mutual acquaintances, but had been unable to locate them at the address provided. When Michael raised these concerns, Priya became tearful, explaining that her family was private and preferred to keep their wedding preparations confidential until everything was finalized. The financial requests also intensified as the wedding date approached. Emergency expenses kept arising. Her father's medical bills after a sudden illness, additional costs for venue security that hadn't been included in the original contract, customs fees for importing specific decorative items Michael had requested from Canada. Each request came with detailed explanations and apologetic tone, accompanied by Priya's assurances that these would be the final additional costs. By January, Michael had transferred over $45,000 to various accounts that Priya claimed belonged to wedding vendors, government officials processing her visa application, and family members helping with preparations. The amounts individually seemed reasonable, but together they represented nearly half of his savings accumulated over 8 years of careful financial planning. The breaking point should have come when Michael's cousin Jasmeet, who lived in Delhi, offered to travel to Amritsar to meet Priya's family in person. Priya's reaction was immediate and emotional. She accused Michael of not trusting her, questioned whether he was having second thoughts about their marriage, and threatened to call off the wedding if he couldn't show faith in their relationship. The argument lasted hours, with Priya alternating between tears and anger, ultimately convincing Michael that his suspicions were damaging their bond. Instead of investigating further, Michael doubled down on his commitment. He booked his flights to India for February, arranged for the final wedding payments to be transferred, and began shopping for the elaborate gifts he would present to Priya's family during the traditional ceremonies. The ruby and gold necklace set he purchased from a Toronto jeweler cost $8,000 and came with authentication certificates that he planned to present during the formal engagement ceremony. Michael's Air India flight touched down at Indira Gandhi International Airport on a foggy February morning, with Delhi's winter air carrying the familiar blend of spices, exhaust fumes, and possibility that always accompanied his returns to the subcontinent. After 12 hours of restless anticipation, he felt the nervous energy of a man about to meet his destiny. The connecting flight to Amritsar would depart in 3 hours, giving him just enough time to purchase the additional gifts he had planned for Priya's extended family: Swiss chocolates, Canadian maple syrup, and a collection of Toronto souvenir items that would demonstrate his thoughtfulness and cultural pride. The flight to Amritsar was delayed by 2 hours due to weather conditions, extending Michael's anxiety as he clutched the carry-on bag containing the ruby necklace set and formal engagement documents his immigration lawyer had prepared. He had memorized his planned speech in Punjabi, practiced the traditional greetings he would offer to Priya's parents, and mentally rehearsed every detail of the ceremony that would formalize their commitment before God, family, and the Canadian immigration authorities who would process Priya's spousal visa. At Sri Guru Ram Das Ji International Airport in Amritsar, Michael scanned the arrival area, expecting to see Priya's bright smile and her father's dignified presence. Instead, he found only a handful of taxi drivers and tour guides offering services to visiting pilgrims. His phone showed no messages from Priya, and when he tried calling her number, it went directly to voicemail. The first tendrils of genuine worry began creeping through his excitement as he realized that the woman he had been planning to marry had somehow failed to meet him at the airport. The taxi ride to the address Priya had provided took him through narrow streets lined with traditional Punjabi architecture, past markets bustling with evening shoppers, and finally to a modest residential area where small concrete houses stood behind metal gates. The driver stopped in front of house number 47B, exactly matching the address Michael had written carefully in his notebook. But when he approached the gate and knocked, an elderly Sikh man emerged who had never heard of anyone named Priya Sharma or her family. Confusion turned to panic as Michael realized that either he had been given the wrong address or something far more sinister was happening. The neighbor suggested he try the local Gurudwara, explaining that religious leaders often helped visitors locate community members, especially those involved in marriage arrangements. At Gurudwara Sri Dukh Nivaran Sahib, the head priest listened patiently to Michael's story before shaking his head with a mixture of sympathy and concern that sent ice through Michael's veins. "Beta, there is no family named Sharma at that address," the priest said gently in Punjabi. "That house has been occupied by the Chahal family for over 15 years. Are you certain you have the correct information?" Michael's world began to shift on its axis as he realized that everything he had believed about Priya's life might be fiction carefully constructed to deceive him. Desperate for answers, Michael checked into a small hotel near the Golden Temple and began making frantic phone calls. Priya's number continued going to voicemail. Her WhatsApp messages showed as delivered but unread, and every attempt to reach her family through the contact information she had provided led to dead ends. The immigration consultant he had hired in Toronto was equally baffled, explaining that all the documentation Priya had submitted appeared legitimate, but obviously contained false addresses and contact information. It was during his second sleepless night in Amritsar that Michael's phone finally rang with a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end spoke in heavily accented English, introducing himself as Harpreet Singh and explaining that he needed to meet Michael urgently about a matter concerning Priya Sharma. They arranged to meet at a tea stall near the Golden Temple, where Michael hoped to finally get answers about the woman who had vanished just when their future together was supposed to begin. Harpreet Singh was a man in his early 30s, wearing a traditional kurta and carrying himself with the weary dignity of someone bearing terrible news. After ordering tea for both of them, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a smartphone, scrolling to a photograph that made Michael's blood freeze. It showed Priya in a red wedding sari, standing beside a bearded Sikh man during what was clearly a religious marriage ceremony, both of them smiling with the happiness of newlyweds. "This is my brother Navdeep," Harpreet said quietly. "He has been married to the woman you know as Priya Sharma for 3 years. Her real name is Simran Kaur, and she has been using her money to support their household while pretending to be single and available for marriage to foreign men." The photograph hit Michael like a physical blow, causing him to nearly drop his tea glass, as the reality of his situation crystallized with brutal clarity. The woman he had planned to spend his life with, whose visa applications were sitting in immigration offices in both countries, whose $75,000 wedding he had funded, was already someone else's wife. The ruby necklace in his hotel room, the carefully practiced Punjabi phrases, the months of sleepless nights planning their future together, all of it had been built on an elaborate lie that was now crumbling before his eyes. "She told me her name was Priya Sharma," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible above the evening prayer calls echoing from the Golden Temple. "She said she was single, working as a teacher, living with her parents who wanted to see her married to a good family." Harpreet's expression showed a mixture of sympathy and anger as he swiped to more photographs on his phone. Wedding pictures, family gatherings, and recent images of Simran and Navdeep together at various celebrations, clearly living as a happily married couple. "My brother Navdeep works as a mechanic in our village near Tarantaran," Harpreet explained, his English careful but determined. "Simran has been married to him for 3 years. They have been using the money you sent to buy a new house, a motorcycle, and to start a small business. She told him the money came from her job teaching private English lessons to wealthy families, but we became suspicious when the amounts were too large and too regular." The scope of the deception was staggering as Harpreet continued explaining. Simran had created an entirely fictional identity, complete with false family members, fake addresses, and elaborate backstories designed to appeal to Canadian men seeking traditional Indian brides. The school, where she claimed to work, was fictitious. The parents Michael had spoken to during video calls were hired actors, and even the modest house he had seen in the background was borrowed from a neighbor specifically for their conversations. "We discovered she had been doing this with at least 4 other men," Harpreet said, showing Michael screenshots of social media accounts and matrimonial profiles with different names but the same woman. "There is an American businessman in California, an engineer in London, a doctor in Australia, all of them sending money for weddings that will never happen, for a woman who is already married and laughing at their kindness." Michael's hands began shaking as he realized the full extent of his humiliation. Every tender moment, every loving message, every shared dream had been part of a calculated performance designed to extract maximum financial benefit from his loneliness and cultural displacement. The woman who had promised to build a life with him in Canada was already building that life with someone else, using his money to fund their actual happiness while he remained a stranger financing his own deception. The confrontation Harpreet proposed was both necessary and terrifying. "Navdeep deserves to know the truth about what his wife has been doing," he said firmly. "And you deserve to face the woman who has stolen your money and your trust. We have arranged for you to meet them both tonight at our family home. Simran does not know that we have discovered her activities, or that you are here in India." As evening approached, Michael found himself in a borrowed car driving through Punjab's rural roads toward a village whose name he couldn't pronounce, carrying evidence of a fraud that had consumed nearly 2 years of his life. The ruby necklace was still in his hotel room, along with all the wedding gifts he had brought from Canada, symbols of a future that had never existed except in his desperate imagination. The farmhouse where Navdeep and Simran lived was modest, but well-maintained, clearly benefiting from the regular influx of money that Michael now understood had come from his own bank account. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, and he could hear the sounds of domestic life. Dinner being prepared, television playing, the normal rhythms of a married couple's evening routine funded by his unwitting generosity. Harpreet had planned the confrontation carefully, timing it for when both Navdeep and Simran would be home together, ensuring that the truth would emerge in front of witnesses who could prevent any attempts at further deception. But as Michael approached the front door, his emotions were a volatile mixture of heartbreak, rage, and humiliation that made his hands shake and his vision blur with the intensity of betrayal. The woman who opened the door was unmistakably the face he had fallen in love with through computer screens, but seeing her in person revealed details that video calls had hidden. She was shorter than he had imagined, her skin showing the natural imperfections that filters and careful lighting had concealed, and most devastatingly, her left hand displayed the traditional gold bangles and henna patterns that marked her as a married woman in Indian culture. The recognition in Simran's eyes was immediate and devastating. The woman Michael had known as Priya Sharma stood frozen in the doorway, her face cycling through emotions, surprise, fear, calculation, and finally a cold defiance that revealed the true person beneath months of carefully constructed lies. Behind her, a bearded man in his late 20s appeared, clearly Navdeep, her real husband, looking confused by the sudden appearance of strangers at his door. "Who is this man?" Navdeep asked his wife in Punjabi, his voice carrying the innocent curiosity of someone whose world was about to shatter. Simran's response was a barely audible whisper, her eyes never leaving Michael's face as she realized that her elaborate deception had finally collapsed. The money she had been using to furnish their home, buy jewelry, and fund their comfortable lifestyle had come from the man now standing before them with evidence of her betrayal. Michael's voice, when he finally found it, was steady but filled with a rage that had been building for days. "Ask your wife about the Canadian man she was planning to marry next month," he said in English, his words cutting through the evening air like a blade. "Ask her about the $75,000 she took from me for a wedding that was never going to happen because she's been married to you for 3 years." The confrontation that followed was a collision of 3 shattered lives, each person grappling with betrayals that ran deeper than money or broken promises. Navdeep's fury was immediate and volcanic as he understood that his wife had been living a double life, using their marriage as cover for an elaborate international fraud. His questions came in rapid-fire Punjabi, demanding explanations for the expensive items in their home, the unexplained income, the lies that had funded their entire relationship. Simran's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. Harpreet presented screenshots of matrimonial profiles, bank transfer receipts, and most damaging of all, recorded phone conversations where she had professed love to Michael while planning a future that would abandon Navdeep entirely. Her claims of innocence became increasingly desperate as both men realized the full scope of her manipulation. "She told me she was going to divorce you after getting Canadian citizenship," Michael said, his voice breaking as he addressed Navdeep directly. "She said you were just practice, that I was her real future. She was going to take half of everything I owned and disappear with my money while you waited for a wife who was never coming back." The violence erupted suddenly when Navdeep grabbed the iron towel from their kitchen and struck Simran across the head in a moment of rage that silenced her explanations forever. Michael watched in horror as the woman who had destroyed 2 years of his life collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across the tiles of the home his money had helped purchase. The sound of her skull cracking against the concrete was followed by a silence that seemed to stretch across the entire Punjab countryside. Harpreet immediately called the police while Michael stood paralyzed by the realization that his pursuit of justice had led to a woman's death. Navdeep sat on the floor beside his wife's body, alternating between grief for the woman he had loved and rage at the lies that had destroyed everything he believed about their marriage. The investigation that followed revealed a network of similar frauds spanning multiple countries, with Simran's death marking the violent end of an operation that had defrauded dozens of lonely men seeking love across international borders. Michael returned to Toronto carrying trauma that no amount of money could heal. The ruby necklace remained unopened in his luggage, a symbol of dreams that had been weaponized against him. His testimony helped convict Simran's accomplices in both Canada and India, but the legal victories felt hollow compared to the psychological devastation of having his capacity for love so thoroughly exploited. Navdeep was sentenced to 8 years in prison for manslaughter, his defense arguing that he had acted in a moment of extreme emotional disturbance upon discovering his wife's betrayal. The case became a landmark prosecution for international marriage fraud, leading to stricter verification processes for matrimonial websites and better cooperation between immigration authorities across multiple countries. The money Michael had sent was never recovered. The house, the jewelry, the motorcycle, all of it had been purchased with funds from multiple victims, making restitution impossible. But the awareness campaign that emerged from the case helped prevent similar frauds, with immigration offices now requiring face-to-face meetings and comprehensive background checks before processing spousal visas. Michael eventually found healing through support groups for fraud victims, sharing his story as a warning to others about the sophisticated methods criminals use to exploit loneliness and cultural displacement. He never married, unable to fully trust again, but he found purpose in protecting others from the kind of devastation that had nearly destroyed his faith in human connection. The village where Simran and Navdeep had lived became a cautionary tale throughout Punjab, a reminder that the pursuit of easy money through deception could destroy not just the victims, but the perpetrators themselves. 3 lives had indeed been destroyed forever, one ending in death, one in prison, and one in the permanent scar tissue of betrayal that would never fully heal.